I broke into my ex-boyfriend's life, and now I don't want to leave. When Conrad cheated on me with my own cousin at my birthday party, I wanted revenge so badly I could taste it. The betrayal happened right in my apartment. I walked out of the bathroom to find them making out on my couch with all our friends pretending not to notice. The humiliation burned through me for weeks afterward, and I thought I'd never recover. But then I saw a Facebook post from this girl named Adeline needing a roommate. You see, Adeline had been Conrad's best friend since middle school. She knew all his secrets and had access to everything that could ruin him. His passwords, his work drama, even those embarrassing photos from college he made everyone delete. So when I saw that Facebook post, I jumped at the chance. I messaged her that same night, playing it cool. I told her I needed a fresh start after the breakup, and her place looked perfect. She responded with sympathy, saying she heard about what happened at the party. She called Conrad an idiot and said I deserved better. I smiled at my phone, thinking how easy this would be. Moving in was simple. Adeline helped me carry boxes up 3 flights of stairs without complaining once. She'd already cleared out half the bathroom cabinet and made space in the kitchen for my stuff. She even bought my favorite coffee creamer after stalking my Instagram. I remember thinking she was making my infiltration almost too easy. The first month was all about gaining her trust. I'd cook dinner when she worked late at the veterinary clinic. I'd listen to her complain about difficult pet owners and nod sympathetically. I started leaving little notes on the coffee maker for her morning shifts, all calculated moves to get her comfortable enough to spill Conrad's secrets. She began opening up more each week. During our wine nights, she'd tell stories about Conrad that I filed away for later use, like how he lied to his boss about having a degree he never finished, or how he was stealing clients from his company to start his own business. She had no idea she was handing me ammunition. But then weird things started happening. I caught myself actually enjoying our conversations. Adeline was genuinely funny in this dry, unexpected way. She'd do impressions of the pet owners that made me laugh until my stomach hurt. She remembered things I mentioned once, like how I missed my mom's banana bread, then surprised me by learning the recipe. 2 months in, everything shifted. I got the call at work that my dad had been in a car accident. My hands shook so badly I dropped my phone. My manager found me hyperventilating in the supply closet. I couldn't form words to explain what happened. I just kept thinking about how my dad and I had been fighting about Conrad, and our last conversation was an argument. I somehow made it home, still in shock. Adeline was there even though she usually worked late on Wednesdays. She took one look at my face and immediately pulled me into a hug. She didn't ask questions or try to fix anything. She just held me while I sobbed into her shoulder. She drove me 4 hours to the hospital without hesitation. She called her boss and said she had a family emergency. During the drive, she held my hand at red lights and made sure I remembered to breathe. She stayed in that uncomfortable waiting room for 10 hours while Dad was in surgery. When the doctor finally said Dad would be okay, I collapsed with relief, and Adeline caught me before I hit the floor. She got us a hotel room and made sure I ate something. She even called my work to explain why I'd need a few days off. I realized she was taking care of me like real family would. Over the next few weeks, she drove me to visit Dad every few days. She'd bring crossword puzzles for him and sneak in his favorite cookies. She made him laugh with stories about the crazy pets at her clinic. My dad started asking when I was bringing that wonderful roommate around again. I started noticing things about Adeline I'd ignored before. How she volunteered at the animal shelter every Saturday. How she sent money to her little brother in college even when she was short on rent. How she defended me to Conrad when he tried to spread rumors about why we broke up. The guilt began eating me alive. Here was this genuinely good person who'd become my actual friend, and I'd moved in with the intention of using her. Last week, Adeline found my old journal while we were cleaning. It fell open to the page where I'd written my whole revenge plan. Every detail about how I'd use her to destroy Conrad. She looked at me with tears in her eyes, and before I could say anything, she demanded I get out. I grabbed the box she shoved at me and stumbled backwards into the hallway. The door slammed so hard the walls shook. I stood there frozen, holding this cardboard box full of my bathroom stuff and some clothes she'd thrown in. Through the door, I could hear her crying. These awful broken sobs that made my chest hurt. My hands started shaking and I almost dropped the box. I wanted to knock, to say something, anything, but my mouth wouldn't work. The neighbor across the hall opened their door, took one look at me standing there like an idiot and went back inside. I finally made myself walk down those 3 flights of stairs we'd climbed together so many times. My car was parked on the street and I sat there for an hour just staring at her window. The light stayed on all night. I drove to a motel and barely slept. Kept seeing her face when she read that journal page. The next morning, I stopped at the coffee shop where we always went on Saturdays. I bought her favorite drink and one of those chocolate croissants she loved. My hands were still shaking when I climbed back up to her door. I knocked softly and heard her footsteps. The door opened maybe 2 inches with the chain still on. Her eyes were red and puffy and she wouldn't even look at me. She told me to leave her alone and never come back. The door closed before I could say anything. I left the coffee and pastry on her doormat and walked away. I drove to my dad's house with my boxes in the trunk. He opened the door and took one look at my face. Without asking any questions, he helped me carry my stuff inside. He was still moving slow from his surgery, holding his side when he bent down. He made up the couch with sheets and an old blanket while I stood there useless. That night, I stared at the ceiling for hours. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Adeline bringing him crossword puzzles in the hospital. I kept thinking about her driving 4 hours without complaining when I needed her. By the end of that week, everything fell apart with our friends. They started texting me less and less after Adeline told them what happened. Most of them just stopped answering completely. The few who did respond said they needed space to process everything. I saw photos on Instagram of them all hanging out at the bar we used to go to. Adeline was there smiling like nothing happened, but I could tell it was fake. I deleted all my social media apps because seeing those pictures hurt too much. When I finally went back to work after using emergency time off, my manager called me into her office. She closed the door and asked me to sit down. She'd noticed I'd been making mistakes on reports and missing deadlines. She said she understood I was going through something, but she needed to see improvement soon. I promised to do better, but couldn't focus on anything. Every time I looked at spreadsheets, I kept thinking about Adeline's tears. During my lunch break, I found a flyer for employee assistance counseling stuck to the break room bulletin board. My hands were shaking again when I called the number. The woman who answered was really nice and didn't judge when I started crying on the phone. She scheduled me for next week and said it was brave to ask for help. That weekend, I sat at my dad's kitchen table with my laptop. I went through every folder and deleted all the screenshots I'd saved of Conrad's messages. I deleted the document where I'd been keeping notes about his work stuff. I found photos Adeline had sent me of us at the animal shelter and almost kept them. But I deleted those too. I packed up her spare key in a small envelope and walked to the post office. I didn't write a note because what could I even say? While I was unpacking more boxes in Dad's garage, I found one of Adeline's vet clinic bills. It must have gotten mixed in with my mail. I drove to her apartment building that night when I knew she'd be at work. I slipped it under her door and left quickly before anyone saw me. My phone buzzed while I was driving home and Conrad's name showed up. His text said Adeline was being dramatic about everything and asked if we could meet up. He wanted to know what she was saying about him and suggested we could compare notes about her. I typed back 2 words telling him to never contact me again. Then I blocked his number and deleted the whole conversation. That night, my dad made dinner and we ate in silence for a while. Finally, I told him everything about moving in with Adeline to get revenge on Conrad. I explained how I'd planned to use her for information and how she'd found my journal. He listened without interrupting while I talked. When I finished, he sighed and said he was disappointed but not surprised. He said I'd been so hurt after Conrad that he worried I'd do something stupid. He made it clear I needed to fix this mess somehow. He also said I couldn't stay on his couch forever and needed to find my own place soon. I spent the next morning at Dad's kitchen table with my laptop open to Conrad's company website. I typed out an anonymous tip about him stealing clients and setting up his own business on the side. My fingers hovered over the send button for what felt like forever. I kept reading it over and over, adding more details about the clients he'd taken and the lies he told his boss. Then I realized I was still just trying to hurt him instead of working on myself. I deleted the whole thing and closed my laptop. 3 days later, I had my first therapy appointment at the employee assistance place. The therapist had this calm way of asking questions that made me really think about why I needed revenge so badly. She explained how my anger at Conrad turned into this whole cycle where I kept hurting people who didn't deserve it. She asked me to write in a journal every night about taking responsibility without making excuses for what I did. I left with homework and a weird feeling like maybe I could actually get better. For 3 weeks, I went to therapy every Tuesday morning before work. Each session, we talked more about my patterns and how I hold on to grudges forever. The therapist helped me see how this wasn't just about Conrad, but went back to other times people hurt me, and I couldn't let go. After the 3rd session, I decided to write Adeline a real apology letter. I spent 4 days working on it at night after Dad went to bed. I kept starting over because the first drafts were all about how bad I felt, instead of how much I'd hurt her. The therapist looked at it with me during our next session, and helped me rewrite parts that were still making excuses. She said the letter needed to be about Adeline's pain, not my guilt. I printed out screenshots showing I'd deleted all of Conrad's information from my devices. I put them in an envelope with the letter and a check for half of the next 3 months' rent, in case she needed help finding a new roommate. I wrote a note promising I wouldn't contact her again unless she reached out first. My hands were shaking when I dropped it in the mailbox outside the post office. That same week, my manager called me into her office and closed the door behind us. She pulled out a folder with copies of my recent work that had mistakes circled in red pen. She laid out specific goals I needed to meet in the next month, or I'd face more serious consequences, including maybe losing my job. I took notes while she talked and promised to meet every single deadline. The next Saturday, I started volunteering at the animal shelter on the opposite side of town from where Adeline usually went. I picked Tuesday evenings and Sunday mornings, making sure to avoid her regular Saturday shift. 2 weeks into volunteering, I was cleaning the cat area when I saw Adeline walk in with donation bags. We made eye contact for maybe 2 seconds before she turned and walked straight to the dog section on the other side of the building. The shelter coordinator saw the whole thing but didn't say anything about it. I kept cleaning the litter boxes and tried to focus on the cats instead of the knot in my stomach. A few days later, I got a bill from the electric company for Adeline's apartment. I realized the utilities were still in both our names from when I moved in. I called the company and paid my half directly for the rest of her lease term. The customer service person asked why we weren't splitting the bill anymore, and I just said we weren't roommates now. I did the same thing with the gas and internet companies. Then Conrad's email showed up in my inbox with the subject line, legal action. He wrote this long, angry message saying he'd sue me for defamation if I spread any lies about his business. He said he had proof I was trying to ruin his reputation, and his lawyer was ready to file papers. Dad was reading the newspaper at the kitchen table when I showed him the email on my phone. He called his lawyer friend who went to his church and forwarded the whole thing to him. The lawyer called back an hour later and told us to save everything but not respond at all. He said to document any other contact from Conrad, but never engage with him. My anxiety was so bad that night I couldn't eat dinner. During my next therapy session, we worked on something called separating accountability from self-punishment. The therapist explained that sitting around feeling guilty about Adeline didn't actually help her at all. We practiced different responses for situations I might face, like running into mutual friends or seeing Conrad somewhere. She helped me understand the difference between taking responsibility and just beating myself up all the time. That weekend, Dad sat me down at the kitchen table with a calendar and a red pen. He circled a date exactly 2 months away and said that was my move-out deadline. He wasn't being mean about it, but made it really clear I couldn't hide at his house forever. We spent the rest of the afternoon looking at apartment listings online. He said he'd help with the security deposit if I found something reasonable. I bookmarked 5 places that looked okay and started filling out applications that night. The next morning, I opened my laptop and pulled up the draft email I'd written to Conrad's company, HR, about his client stealing. My finger hovered over the send button for maybe 10 seconds before I highlighted everything and hit delete. I opened a new message to Conrad instead and typed out 3 sentences saying any future contact would be considered harassment, and I'd document everything. I blocked him on every platform I could think of and felt my shoulders drop like I'd been carrying something heavy for months. At work on Monday, I turned in the quarterly report 2 days before the deadline. My manager looked surprised when I handed her the folder and said she'd review it that afternoon. The numbers were clean and organized exactly how she liked them. She called me into her office later and mentioned the improvement while making notes in my file. My coworkers started asking if I wanted to grab lunch with them again instead of eating at my desk. I said yes, and we went to the sandwich place down the street where they talked about normal office stuff, and I actually laughed at someone's story about their kid's soccer game. 3 days later, my phone buzzed with a text from Adeline asking if we could meet at the coffee shop on 5th Street to exchange some mail that was still coming to the apartment. Her message just said Saturday at 2 p.m. and asked if that worked. I typed back that I'd be there and spent the next 2 days practicing what I'd say in my head. Saturday came too fast, and I got to the coffee shop 15 minutes early. I ordered a black coffee and sat at a corner table where I could see the door. Adeline walked in exactly at 2 wearing her vet clinic scrubs like she'd come straight from work. She sat down across from me without ordering anything and pushed a small stack of mail across the table. I started to apologize, but she cut me off and told me about this girl from high school who pretended to be her friend just to copy her homework. She said that girl dropped her the second she didn't need help anymore. Then she looked right at me and said what I did felt worse because she'd actually believed we were real friends this time. I sat there feeling the weight of being another person on the list of people who'd used her. I pulled out my wallet and offered to help with rent until she found someone new for my room. She shook her head and said she already had someone moving in next week. She didn't need my money or my guilt. She just wanted me to leave her alone. I promised I would respect that boundary completely, and watched her walk out without looking back. The animal shelter had volunteer orientation every Tuesday, so I signed up for that instead of the Saturday shift Adeline always worked. The coordinator showed me around and explained they really needed help with the evening feeding and morning cleaning crews. I picked Tuesday evenings and Sunday mornings to make sure I'd never overlap with Adeline's schedule. The first week I mostly cleaned kennels and refilled water bowls. The dogs didn't care that I was there to avoid someone or work through guilt. They just wanted their dinner and maybe a quick scratch behind the ears. One big lab mix kept trying to steal the mop while I cleaned his kennel and made me laugh for the first time in days. My cousin sent me a Facebook message the next week saying we should talk about what happened at my birthday party. She wrote this long thing about how Conrad had been going through stuff, and maybe we could all move past it. I typed and deleted 5 different responses before settling on telling her I wasn't ready for that conversation, and might never be. I hit send and then muted her messages. Setting that boundary felt better than pretending everything was fine. 2 days later, I got a call from someone at Conrad's company saying they were investigating some concerns about his conduct. The woman on the phone said my name had come up as someone who might have relevant information. I kept my answers short and stuck to basic facts when she asked specific questions. Yes, we dated for 2 years. Yes, the relationship ended 6 months ago. No, I didn't want to add any additional comments. She thanked me for my time and said someone might follow up if they needed clarification. I hung up and immediately called my therapist to move up our next appointment. During the session, we practiced different scenarios where I might get pulled back into the Conrad drama. She had me rehearse keeping responses brief and factual without adding emotional color or extra details. We went through it maybe 6 times until I could answer calmly without my voice shaking or getting defensive. She wrote in her notes that I was getting better at not turning everything into a crisis. The role play felt silly at first, but it helped when the HR person called back a week later with follow-up questions. After 6 weeks of meeting every deadline and turning in clean work, my manager called me in for my review. She pulled out the performance improvement plan we'd signed and drew a line through it. She said I'd shown consistent improvement, and she trusted me to maintain this level going forward. She mentioned the raise would show up in my next paycheck. I thanked her for being patient while I dealt with personal stuff, and she said everyone goes through rough patches. Walking out of her office felt like passing a test I'd been sure I'd fail. That same Tuesday at the shelter, I was scrubbing water bowls in the back when 2 other volunteers started talking about Adeline near the supply closet. The woman said something about how Adeline seemed different lately and wondered if something happened with her roommate situation. I kept my head down and focused on the metal bowls clanking against the sink. The guy mentioned he'd heard through someone that Adeline's old roommate had done something pretty bad, but nobody knew the details. The woman asked if I knew anything since we volunteered similar hours sometimes. I just shrugged and said I tried to keep things professional at the shelter. She nodded and said she respected that I didn't spread gossip even when others brought stuff up. I finished the bowls and moved on to refilling the dry food containers without adding anything else. That night, my phone buzzed with a Facebook message from someone I didn't recognize at first. The profile picture showed a college-aged guy who looked familiar in that way, where you've seen someone in photos before. His message said he was Adeline's brother, and he wanted to know what happened between us. He wrote that his sister wouldn't tell him anything, but she'd been really upset and he was worried about her. I stared at the message for maybe 10 minutes before typing back. I told him I was sorry for hurting his sister and that she deserved better friends than me. He asked what I meant, but I didn't explain or try to justify anything. I just wished him well with his studies and left it at that. 3 days later, I was going through boxes in Dad's garage looking for my winter clothes when I found an old recipe box from the apartment. Inside was the banana bread recipe card Adeline had written all over with her own notes and tips. She'd added things like extra vanilla makes it better, and mash bananas really well or you get chunks. Her handwriting was all over the margins with little arrows pointing to different steps. I held that card for a long time, remembering how she'd spent a whole Saturday perfecting the recipe, just because I mentioned missing my mom's version. I got an envelope and wrote her apartment address on it. Inside, I put the recipe card with a sticky note that just said, "This belongs to you." I drove to the post office that afternoon and mailed it without a return address. It felt like giving back a piece of the friendship I didn't deserve to keep. The next week, my phone started blowing up with texts from mutual friends about Conrad. Someone forwarded me a screenshot from LinkedIn showing his company had put out a statement about investigating employee misconduct. The post said multiple former coworkers had come forward with concerns about client relationships and business practices. People were asking if I knew anything about it, or if I was involved somehow. I didn't respond to any of the messages. I just read through them and felt relief that consequences had found him without me having to do anything. Friday morning, I woke up to angry texts from a number I didn't recognize. The first one said, "I know this is your fault," and they got worse from there. Conrad was blaming me for his work problems and saying I must have called his company or spread rumors to get revenge. He threatened to tell everyone what a psycho I was and ruin my reputation at my job. He said he had proof I was obsessed with him, and nobody would believe anything I said. I took screenshots of every single message and saved them to a folder on my phone. Then I blocked the new number and added everything to the documentation file my dad's lawyer friend had suggested I keep. I didn't respond to any of it or engage at all. Dad had been doing physical therapy 3 times a week and finally hit the milestone of walking without his cane. His therapist said he was ahead of schedule and could start doing more normal activities. We decided to celebrate with dinner at home where I cooked his favorite pot roast with the vegetables he actually liked. While we ate, he told me he was proud of how I was handling everything now. He said he wished I'd never needed to learn these lessons, but he could see I was really trying to be better. We talked about normal stuff like his therapy exercises and my work projects. It was the first time in weeks we'd had a conversation that wasn't about my mess with Adeline or Conrad. Monday morning, my manager called me into her office again, but this time she was smiling. She said she had a small project that needed someone to lead it, and she thought I was ready for the responsibility. It was just updating some client presentations, but it meant coordinating with 3 other people and presenting to upper management. I threw myself into making those presentations perfect. I triple-checked every slide and practiced the talking points until I knew them cold. When presentation day came, everything went smoothly, and the executives asked good questions I was prepared to answer. My confidence at work slowly started feeling normal again, instead of like I was constantly about to get fired. The animal shelter was having their annual adoption event, and needed all hands on deck for the Saturday it was scheduled. The coordinator sent out an email saying everyone needed to sign up for shifts regardless of their usual schedule. When I looked at the sign-up sheet, I saw Adeline had already claimed the morning setup slot. I picked the same time because we'd need to work the busiest shift anyway. Saturday morning, I got there early and started setting up tables without waiting for assignments. Adeline arrived 15 minutes later and we made eye contact briefly before she went to the opposite side of the event space. Throughout the morning, we had to coordinate on things like where to put the adoption forms and which dogs should be in which pens. We kept everything professional and only talked about task-related stuff. When she needed help moving a heavy table, I just grabbed the other end without making it weird. The shelter coordinator came by at lunch and thanked us both for keeping things running smooth, despite what she called the awkwardness. Neither of us responded, but we kept working through the afternoon without any problems. Near the end of the event, I was walking a potential adopter to meet one of the dogs when I heard someone talking to another volunteer. The woman was saying something about how Adeline was naive for trusting her sketchy roommate and should have seen the red flags. I stopped walking and turned around immediately. I told the woman that Adeline was a good person who saw the best in people, and that wasn't naive, it was kind. The woman looked surprised and started to say something else, but I cut her off. I said Adeline's trust was actually a strength, and anyone who took advantage of it was the problem, not her. The woman dropped it and walked away while the adopter asked if I was okay. Sunday night, my phone buzzed with a text from Adeline's number. All it said was, "Got the recipe card. Thanks." It was the first message from her that wasn't about logistics or boundaries since she'd kicked me out. I stared at it for a long time before just hitting the heart reaction on the message. I didn't type anything back because she'd been clear about wanting space, and I needed to respect that even if this felt like a tiny crack in the wall between us. My next therapy session was on Tuesday, and the therapist brought up something I hadn't thought about. She asked if I'd considered having one last conversation with Adeline for closure, but only if Adeline was willing. She said sometimes people need to say things face to face to really process what happened. I sat there picking at the arm of the chair while she explained how it could help both of us move forward. That night, I typed and deleted about 20 different messages to Adeline. I finally sent one saying I was available if she ever wanted to talk, but there was no pressure at all. I made sure to say this would be the last time I'd reach out to her. I put my phone face down and tried not to check it every 5 minutes. 3 days went by without any response, and I figured that was my answer. Then Thursday afternoon, my phone buzzed with her name on the screen. She said she'd meet me at the park near the library, but she had conditions. She wanted it during daylight hours, maximum 1 hour, and we'd only talk about specific things she listed. I typed back immediately that I agreed to everything, and thanked her for even considering it. Saturday morning, I got to the park 20 minutes early and sat on a bench near the playground. Kids were running around screaming while their parents watched from the shade. Adeline showed up exactly on time and sat at the opposite end of the bench. She looked good, healthier than when I'd last seen her at the shelter. She started by saying she almost didn't come, but her own therapist thought it might help. I told her I understood, and I was grateful she showed up at all. She pulled out a piece of paper with notes she'd written, and I realized she'd really prepared for this. I started talking about every single manipulative thing I'd done without trying to justify any of it. I told her about stalking her social media before moving in, about taking notes on Conrad's secrets, about pretending to care when I was really just gathering information. She listened without interrupting while I laid out every calculated move I'd made. When I finished, she told me how lonely she'd been before I moved in. She said she'd been so happy to finally have a close female friend after years of mostly hanging out with Conrad and his guy friends. She explained how my betrayal made her question every friendship she'd ever had and wonder if she was just bad at reading people. Her voice cracked when she talked about second-guessing every nice thing anyone did for her now. We both had tears running down our faces, but it felt necessary, like we were finally being completely honest. She said the worst part was that our friendship had felt so real to her. She'd thought we had this special connection, and finding out it started as a lie destroyed her ability to trust her own judgment. I told her that the friendship became real for me too, but I understood why she couldn't believe that. We talked about how to handle living in the same city without making each other uncomfortable. She said she'd keep her regular Saturday morning shift at the shelter, and I could volunteer any other time. We agreed to be polite if we ran into each other at mutual friends events, but wouldn't seek each other out. She had a whole list of places she regularly went, and we figured out how to avoid overlap. Before the hour was up, she stood and said this was the closure she needed. She told me she couldn't forgive me yet and might never be able to, but she didn't hate me anymore. She walked away without looking back, and I sat there for another hour just processing everything. Monday at work, my manager called me in for my performance review. She had this smile on her face that made me relax immediately. She went through all my recent projects and said I'd not only bounced back but actually improved. She showed me the numbers and they were better than before everything fell apart. She said she didn't know what I'd been dealing with personally, but whatever I'd worked through had made me more focused. She approved a small raise and told me she was promoting me to senior coordinator. I thanked her and managed to hold it together until I got to the bathroom where I cried from relief. 2 weeks later, I got a text from Adeline saying she'd signed a lease for a new place closer to the vet clinic. She asked me to stop trying to send money or make financial amends because she was doing fine on her own. She said my guilt payments weren't helping either of us move forward. I texted back that I understood and wished her happiness in her new place. A few days after that, I got a Facebook message from her little brother. He thanked me for contributing to a scholarship fund at his college in Adeline's name. He said she'd mentioned it helped him buy textbooks this semester. He didn't seem to know about our falling out and just wanted to say thanks. I was glad at least one good thing came from my attempts to make things right. The break room at work was buzzing the next week with gossip about Conrad's company. Apparently multiple people had reported him for ethics violations, and he'd been under investigation for months. The woman from accounting said he got a final warning and had to do mandatory ethics training, but managed to keep his job. It wasn't the dramatic downfall I'd once fantasized about, but it seemed like appropriate consequences. That weekend, I sat at Dad's kitchen table and wrote a long letter to Conrad that I knew I'd never send. I wrote about the humiliation of finding him with my cousin at my own birthday party. I wrote about how his betrayal had turned me into someone I didn't recognize. I wrote about all the pain and anger I'd carried for months. Dad came out back with me as I put the pages in his fire pit. We watched the smoke disappear into the dark sky, and it felt like letting go of the last piece of anger I'd been holding. Dad mentioned maybe inviting Adeline to dinner to thank her for everything she did during his surgery. I explained that she needed space and contact from us would just make things harder for her. He understood but said he wanted her to know he was grateful. He ended up sending his thanks through a mutual friend who worked at the vet clinic. The friend told him later that Adeline had smiled and said she was glad he was doing better. 2 weeks later, I found the perfect studio apartment on the 3rd floor of a building near downtown. The landlord ran my credit check while I waited in his office and handed me the keys that same afternoon. Dad drove me around to look at furniture at thrift stores, and we loaded his truck with a couch that smelled like cigarettes and a wobbly kitchen table. We spent the whole weekend moving boxes up those stairs, and he kept stopping to catch his breath but wouldn't let me carry the heavy stuff alone. He helped me hang curtains and set up the bed frame we bought from a guy on Craigslist. When we finished unpacking the kitchen boxes, he stood in my tiny living room and told me he was proud of how I'd handled everything these past months. The next Saturday at the shelter, I was cleaning kennels when the coordinator asked if I could help with a new rescue dog that wouldn't let anyone near him. I walked into the intake room and saw Adeline already there with thick gloves on, trying to coax the German Shepherd mix out from behind the exam table. We made eye contact for a second before focusing on the dog who was shaking and growling low in his throat. I grabbed the slip lead while she opened a can of wet food, and we worked without talking much except to coordinate our movements. She'd move left and I'd block the right exit, then I'd distract him while she put the food bowl closer. After an hour, the dog finally crept forward to eat while we both stood perfectly still against the walls. When he finished eating and let Adeline check his collar for tags, we shared a quick smile before going back to our separate tasks. 3 days later, I sat in my therapist's office for what she said would be our last weekly session. She pulled out a calendar and we mapped out monthly check-ins for the next 6 months with the option to call if I needed extra support. She went through all the coping strategies we'd practiced and said I'd gotten good at recognizing my patterns before they turned destructive. I left her office feeling steady, like I could handle things without needing someone to guide me through every decision. Dad's birthday came up that Thursday, and I spent the morning in my small kitchen making Mom's banana bread from the recipe card I'd kept in my wallet. The apartment filled with the smell of cinnamon and vanilla while I waited for it to bake. Dad loved it, and mentioned at dinner that his friend from the clinic told Adeline about the bread. She'd sent back a smiley face emoji through their text chain. Nothing more. But Dad showed me his phone with this hopeful look. I stared at that tiny yellow face on the screen and felt something shift in my chest. Not quite forgiveness, but maybe the possibility of it someday. All right, that's a wrap for today. Really appreciate you letting me just wonder about things with you all. It's always a good time. Until we cross paths again, subscribe for more content like this.